Think there's a generational difference in how people are playing video games. I think we kind of came from a much more competitive generation when it came to games. Now that COVID's over, people are outside, they're playing sports more, they're getting their competitive itch there. And I think a lot of the kids these days are getting their enjoyment out of playing like kind of massive multiplayer games, kind of like Roblox, Minecraft, etc. And so the appeal of the like League of Legends, Dota, Counter-Strike, Valorant is a little bit less these days.
You know, I've been thinking about this clip lately, and it's been slowly building this narrative within me about the shifting dynamics around games. The dynamic that some of the most popular team-based games in the world somehow bring out the worst in us, and as a result, arguably some of the most lonely experiences in games. How funny is it that when we are the most lonely playing games, in the games where we are surrounded with the most amount of people, arguably, on a consistent basis, the most amount of team interaction. That's crazy to me. This dynamic is a result of not only of the culture that we have in competitive games, but also a major systematic and cultural issue brought on by the publishers of these games themselves. They are killing their own game. No amount of balance changes, patch updates, or content releases can fix a feeling like this, and left untreated could single-handedly drive these games out of popularity. This is not a design issue per se. This is a cultural issue and a marketing issue that transcends any level of design flaws that are present in these games. It's not cool to just be stressed out and play these games and feel so lonely, ironically, in a game where you just want to hang out with your friends and you want to have the best with your friends, right? So let's break that down. Think of it this way. The worst part about these games is actually playing them. The IP is dope. On paper, the community is really sick, filled out arenas, wonderful events. It really brings the world together. You watch Arcane, you think that world is so rich, then you queue up for solo queue, and oh no, it is absolutely cooked. We've lost another one, guys. It's basically the equivalent of online road rage. And somehow, some way, these games manage to, without fail, put you in probably some of the worst moods possible. This new generation of players have gotten sick of logging on after a hard day of work or school just to stress out and get so mad over video games. As a result, the younger generation has simply shifted from an era of competitive games to one that prioritizes simply vibing. Think about some of the most popular games the younger generation leans towards now: Fortnite and Roblox. These games intentionally position themselves away from the competitive model as far as possible and promote instead the ability for players to express themselves in the variety of different modes and the ability to connect with other people in these games as a medium. Fortnite themselves even promoted against this idea of becoming a potential esport, and they were so against it that they ended up stopping the Fortnite World Cup. And arguably, this was one of the best decisions they've actually ever made. Fortnite competitive still exists. There are still competitive modes and things created within Roblox that allows these players that still want their competitive itch to get that. That is not the issue at hand here. But there's a lot of people that want to just log onto their games and spend time in the game with their friends and just hang out. It's really such a shame, because a lot of the games that cause these feelings, you know, the League of Legends of the world, the Valorants of the world, any other competitive title that involves a lot of teammates. In a perfect world, there's so much beauty and nuance to all of these games. I'll use League as an example. I actually think the game is objectively beautiful in its design and the way it flows, honestly. The intricacies of champion mechanics, understanding draft intricacies, macro nuances, why certain things work in specific scenarios, and using that knowledge for your decision making, it really itches your brain in a way that not many other games can do, right? And this is a feeling that, right, of course, games like Fortnite and Roblox cannot replicate, right? This is technically an apples to oranges comparison. However, the focus was never on this though, because fundamentally we could fantasize on and on about the beauty of these games, but the issue is the culture that is generated as a result of the design of these games, but even more so than the design of the games, the system and the culture that's been cultivated by Riot themselves. Riot Games themselves have positioned games like League and Valorant as a super sweaty, super try-hard game. It used to not be this way. Think about the best times, the most enjoyable times for many people in these games, when the games were new, when the focus was not on being as good as possible. Valorant beta, everybody was in COVID. People were just enjoying themselves. It was so hard to be able to get to even play the game that people were just happy to be there. This is a very special edge case, right? Because we were in COVID, You know, people wanted some form of interaction, and when they had Valorant release, they got that. They managed to find a way to meet people over this super exciting thing that they managed to cultivate, and this environment that they managed to cultivate in spite of that. That has led to some of the most magical times for, I'm sure, a lot of people, and that's why so many people are actually impartial to the game, because of the memories they've had in that specific time frame. And that was probably when the game was the most peaceful. You could argue that the game has only gone downhill from there. I can say that for myself. I basically quit the game as soon as COVID started loosening up, as well as probably a lot of different people. The game was still definitely popular, but you can start to feel slowly this shift from a game where you used to just vibe and chill, but people got more acquainted to the game. There were expectations built around how the game was supposed to be played, and when those expectations were not met, people would simply get frustrated. And that is why a game like Valorant has been going down. You could argue the same thing with League. League has had this even more so, right? Before, in arguably my favorite seasons maybe 2 to 4, although this was like a very, you know, pioneeristic time in esports. Let's pretend that's a real word. This is a very unique time where esports was just slowly becoming a real thing. You know, League was really establishing what it felt like to have a game like this, to have so much depth, to have so many systems and actively changing, to be part of a community, right? You come home after school, you play League, you follow the scene, you're like, wow, this is so cool. There's more changes coming every single day, every single week. You know, there's a new patch that's dropping, there's new content that's dropping. You're like, wow, this is a new mode, guys. Have you seen that? You're trying to run that after school. Like, what are you saying? Right? That is the point. You go in, you hang out with your friends after. This is a great medium for you to spend that. Nowadays, you know, you ask your friends, yo, do you want to play League? Nah, man, I'm too bad at the game. I can't. Like, or like, hey, dude, what rank are you? I don't know, bro. I don't think it'd be good, right? Like, if you see any delta, if you feel major differences in skill across your friends, even if it's close differences in skill across your friends, it can be a very frustrating experience because you're so focused on trying to win, and everybody's so on edge about not making a single mistake, even though mistakes in the game are actually quite subjective. Players can be the same level of skill, but have very different things to bring to the table. But this doesn't mean that people won't argue in a game like League. And it's such a shame because I think League is so fun. But how are you going to enjoy the game when they're so afraid about sucking and making a mistake? How can you have a game where you spend time with people where they're so afraid and they're just playing and they're not even having fun? They're just stressing out over not, you know, messing up. Like, that is the idea that I'm trying to promote here, right? I'm going to switch lenses for a little bit. Let's talk about a game that's not an esport at all that's a recent release, Monster Hunter Wilds. You know, I've always been a competitive gamer all my life, but this game comes out, hot damn. This is some cool ass monsters, big ass world you're immersed in. You get to mount up with your friends. You know, you're so immersive. Boom, you're in there. Why suffer? Why argue with your friends in, you know, or anyone for that matter, in solo queue or whatever game you're choosing to play, where you can have a crazy engaging experience. You know, you're embracing yourself with monsters. You're not focused on necessarily winning and playing perfectly. You just want to play the game because you're playing the game, right? There's not much more to it. You don't really care. You're just shooting the shit with your friends. It doesn't really matter, right? And this is the issue of all of these players that want and love the world and the IPs that a lot of their favorite esports titles have to offer, but there is actually no place for them to get comfortable. Sure, you can argue ARAM, you can argue unrated games, but it's very hard for many players to really just sit down and appreciate that, because I think those games are best enjoyed when you are trying your best. And when you're trying your best and you're really playing at your limit and you're trying to kind of promote a flow-like experience, when there's so many factors that feel like you're taking away that flow, then it's going to be really hard, right? Of course, a game like Monster Hunter is going to be very different from like a game that's competitive and focuses on skill building, and it just doesn't feel the same. The point I'm trying to make is that this is not an issue that's related to the balance or necessarily by design, because I think the design is also a blessing and a curse. It's more so a cultural and a marketing issue, because they are positioned as games that are sweaty and people are so focused on even potentially making this their career. It's quite literally Riot's own fault. You want to hear a crazy take? The League MMO would actually go crazy because it solves all of these issues. I actually think it's quite imperative that they go full throttle on a game like the League MMO, because it taps into all of the good things about the community and the vibes and the IP and everything that I've talked about. and detracts the focus from the downsides and the competition. You just win. You get everything. You cannot lose. We call that a winning matchup. So from my financial perspective, from an economical perspective, if I am the CFO of Riot Games right now, I'm going full steam ahead to produce this game. All hands on deck. Yes, League and Valorant, and yes, we can throw in things like TFT and Runeterra in there. Riot has high incentive to be producing this game. Are there other ways to fix this? I think so, but I do think it's quite a hard solution, and genuinely one that may not be able to be entirely removed, just due to the fundamental nature of these team games, right? The highs in your favorite esports title are not there without the lows. Both just have to exist. There has to be a winner and a loser. It feels really bad to lose, and people really harp on you to make a mistake. But that cutting edge, that fine line between being able to dance at the level of your skill, the exact level of your limit, but also really watching for any mistakes. That's where the fun in these games come from. This is not an excuse for players being so scared of playing the game, they're fully desensitized. It's creating an entire generation of them that are just not willing to deal with this anymore. And we need a way to kind of solve this. A true way to solve this. It's not an easy to fix. I can't say that I had like the best solutions for that. I've given a couple, but I think Riot finding some way to shift the culture and the focus around being able to just play the game because you want to play the game and enjoy the beauty of the game, that is going to be key to fixing this. So if you've made it this far, I do have one takeaway for you for all of this. In spite of Riot not necessarily being able to fix this issue, there is an element of you doing your own part. As much as you want to blame Riot for making it so focused on LP and rank and whatever it is, ultimately it is a game. And if you kind of see the beauty of the game and really understand like what makes the game fun in the first place for you, and if you manage to answer that it isn't the result of the game but just the feeling of the systems of the game and why the intricacies are so cool and the details, right? That's the vibe I try to promote whenever I talk about these games, because I think that's really what it's about. If you can see it in a similar manner, I think you cannot go wrong with these games. And as long as you channel out whatever negative energy, whatever toxicity you find in these games, then I think you're going to be unstoppable, and you don't even need the fixes in design. So